The cards rest quietly in front of you, face down, waiting to be turned. The table hums with a low rhythm. The faint shuffle of chips, a soft exhale from the player to your left, the almost invisible tremor of anticipation in the air. It's a calm moment, but you can feel something underneath it, like static just before a storm. You've just lost a hand, not a big one, not even a dramatic one, but it lingers. A flicker of irritation, a whisper of "why did I call that?" The temptation to chase it, to fix it, to win it back right now. It is where most players start to lose themselves, not in the big all-ins or the tough river calls, but in these quiet, ordinary moments after losing a hand. Tilt doesn't arrive with a roar. It drifts in like smoke, subtle, uninvited and hard to clear. If you enjoy learning the quiet side of the game, take a second to subscribe or leave a comment. It helps more players find their way to this table. Because what we're exploring tonight isn't about aggression or range charts or even big bluffs. It's about composure, the ability to stay still when the cards don't go your way. The truth is, every great player has felt the sting of a bad beat. The tightness in the chest after a bluff gets called, the urge to fix the session. But the best players, the ones who last, who grow, who keep winning quietly over time, learn to meet that feeling with calm awareness instead of reaction. It sounds simple. Stay calm when you lose a hand. But in practice, it's one of the hardest skills to develop. Because poker doesn't just test your strategy, it tests your stability. It reveals how you handle disappointment, uncertainty, and unfairness. When the deck turns cold, it doesn't just challenge your technical knowledge, it challenges your emotional balance. That's what we'll be unpacking here. Not perfection, not control over outcomes, but presence. The skill of noticing what happens inside you the moment the dealer slides your chips across the felt to someone else, and learning to breathe through it. Every player remembers their first real tilt. Maybe it was a bad beat, maybe a careless mistake, maybe just a long session where patience slipped. You tell yourself it's just frustration, but tilt doesn't stop at emotion. It shifts how you see the table. Suddenly your opponent isn't another player, they're an obstacle. The game stops feeling like a rhythm and starts feeling like a fight. And when you're tilted, logic becomes a passenger to impulse. You stop asking, "what's the best move here?" and start asking, "how do I get even?" That shift, subtle, emotional, invisible to everyone else, is what breaks beginners more than bad cards ever could. So tonight, we slow that process down. We'll look at the mechanics of tilt, how it starts, what it feeds on, and how to starve it before it grows. We'll see how your breathing, your attention, and your internal dialogue shape the way you handle a loss, and we'll practice the art of composure, not as a moral idea, but as a repeatable strategy. Because staying calm at the table isn't just about feeling good, it's about keeping access to your full decision-making power. When you lose your temper, you lose perspective. And in poker, perspective is everything. There's a phrase professionals use quietly among themselves. Don't let one hand play the next. That's the essence of emotional discipline. Every hand deserves to be played fresh, clean, free from the noise of the last one. That means learning to let go, not by suppressing emotion, but by observing it, naming it, and returning to the present. Over the next few chapters, we'll move through this idea slowly. We'll start by defining what tilt really is, beneath the cliches. We'll talk about how it shapes your choices street by street. We'll see how professionals structure their play to avoid emotional drift. We'll study small examples, the kind that happen a dozen times per session, and learn how each one carries the seed of either frustration or growth. And we'll end where poker always leads, not in theory or luck, but in self-awareness. So settle in, the chips are stacked neatly, the cards are fresh, and somewhere beyond the shuffle, you'll begin to notice it. That quiet strength that grows when you stop chasing every loss and start trusting you're to think clearly, even in the silence after defeat. That's where composure begins. Tilt, at its core, isn't about anger. It's about attachment. Attachment to the idea that every hand should go your way if you played it right. Attachment to the belief that logic should always be rewarded, that the game owes you fairness. But poker doesn't speak that language. The cards fall where they fall, indifferent to your preparation, your patience, or your mood. Understanding that truth, not just intellectually but emotionally, is the foundation of staying calm when things go wrong. Every beginner approaches the game with a sense of justice. You study, you make good folds, you play solid hands, and when the river betrays you, it feels like a violation of effort. That emotional dissonance is the spark of tilt. Because tilt begins where expectation meets reality. The bigger the gap between what you think should happen and what actually happens, the harder it hits your sense of control. That's why composure isn't built by suppressing emotion. It's built by reshaping expectation. The goal is not to stop feeling disappointment, but to learn to interpret it differently. Instead of seeing a bad beat as failure, you begin to see it as variance expressing itself, an expected temporary distortion of probability. You can't change the cards, but you can change the story you tell yourself about them. The first principle of emotional stability at the table is acceptance. Acceptance doesn't mean surrendering effort, it means releasing entitlement. The moment you accept that poker is designed to include unfair outcomes, you stop fighting the game and start observing it. That shift in mindset turns chaos into information. Imagine a simple hand, you hold pocket kings. The flop comes queen high and the turn and river stay harmless. You play it clean, extracting value. Then at showdown your opponent turns over aces. You played perfectly and still lost. Most players feel a wave of disbelief. Why now? Why me? But the truth is, nothing went wrong. You simply ran into the top of another player's range. Tilt enters when your brain labels this as personal, when you confuse variance with injustice. Now contrast that with the same hand played by a calm, grounded player. They take the same loss, but they understand that the event carries no moral weight. It's not unlucky, it's inevitable. They record the hand, note the situation, breathe and move on. Their emotional baseline stays steady. They haven't detached from caring, they've detached from controlling. That's the second principle, control versus influence. You cannot control outcomes, but you can influence decisions. Tilt happens when your focus drifts toward what's uncontrollable. Composure happens when you redirect your energy toward what still belongs to you, your logic, your timing, your patience. Beginners often misunderstand this difference. They think emotional control means stoicism, like building a wall against frustration. But that wall eventually cracks. The healthier approach is openness, allowing yourself to feel the loss fully, then watching it pass without acting on it. The best players don't suppress, they process. Here's another example. You're holding ace-queen suited in middle position. You raise, get called by the button. The flop comes ace-9 for rainbow. You continuation bet, they call. The turn brings a jack, you bet again and they raise. You pause, maybe they have ace-jack, maybe a set, you call, the river bricks out, you check, they shove, you fold or they flash a bluff as they rake in the pot. The inexperienced player's reaction? Frustration. I knew it! I should have called, they chase the next hand, loosen up, try to win it back. But the calm player looks deeper. They review the line later and see that their fold was still correct in the long run. They understand that even if they were bluffed this time, their process was sound. And in poker, process beats results over time. That understanding acts like an emotional anchor. That brings us to the third foundational idea, process orientation. In poker, outcome is noise, process is signal. If your decisions are built on consistent logic and emotional clarity, the variance eventually evens out. But if you let emotion steer your next few hands, even small tilts can multiply into big losses. The player who focuses on process has nothing to chase, because they're already winning by playing correctly. One way to practice this is to create internal separation after each hand. A brief mental reset. Some players take a slow breath. Others physically stack their chips neatly before the next deal. Small rituals that symbolize an emotional closure. These moments break the chain of reactive thinking and restore presence. There's also a fourth principle that underlies emotional discipline: humility. Not weakness, but respect for uncertainty. Poker humbles everyone, no matter how skilled. The humility to lose well, to accept being outplayed, to fold when unsure, protects your ego from driving your decisions. When you start valuing composure over control, you stop seeing a lost pot as an insult and start seeing it as part of the rhythm of the game. Beginners often forget that poker is a long story told one hand at a time. You don't win the night by forcing victory into each pot. You win it by showing up again and again with clarity and tact. Each moment of restraint adds up, each calm fold compounds into better long-term results. Emotional management, then, isn't just a mental skill, it's a financial one. So the foundation of avoiding tilt early isn't emotional numbness, it's emotional literacy. It's being able to recognize your inner dialogue, the quick stories you tell yourself after a bad hand, and rewrite them consciously. Instead of, "I can't believe that happened," you learn to say, "That's variance doing its job." Instead of, "I need to win it back," you think, "I'll make the next correct decision." And in that shift, the game transforms. You stop battling emotion and start working with it. You begin to understand that composure is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of focus. When you play from that place, poker stops feeling personal. The table becomes quiet again, the air steadies, and you start to see patterns not clouded by frustration. The cards keep falling as they always have, but now you're no longer moved by every wave. That's the real starting point of emotional discipline. You don't control the storm, you learn to stand still in it. Every hand in poker is a small story, a series of choices that move from order to uncertainty. Tilt can enter at any stage of that story, slipping in through frustration, fear, or impatience. To understand how to stay calm, we need to follow that story street by street, to see where emotion hides inside the decision-making process and how awareness transforms it back into control. The hand begins before the cards are even dealt. You're sitting quietly, perhaps with a faint hum of background conversation. The chips cool under your fingers. You take a deep breath, and your only task is to stay centered. The preflop phase is about intention, deciding who you are in this hand before the first card hits the felt. Players who go on tilt often lose composure right here, before the cards even arrive. They've carried a lingering frustration from the last hand, and that emotional residue clouds their choices. They might raise too wide or limp too often, not because logic demands it, but because they want to feel in control again. Preflop tilt is subtle. It's not shouting, it's deviation. The best way to avoid it is to anchor your range and your purpose before the session even begins. You don't need a rigid chart, just a sense of structure. Know what you raise, what you fold, and why. When you stick to a plan, your decisions become an act of alignment, not reaction. Then comes the flop, the moment when the world of possibilities explodes, 3 cards, infinite emotions. Maybe you hit top pair and feel a jolt of excitement, or you miss completely and feel your confidence dip. This is where awareness matters most. Tilt doesn't always start with losing. Sometimes it starts with winning. When you let emotions spike from either end, your judgment bends. A player on a heater can be just as clouded as one on a downswing. The key is equilibrium, staying even whether you connect or not. Imagine you hold pocket tens on a king 7-3 flop. You raised preflop, got one caller, and now face a bet. The rational process is simple. Evaluate texture, opponent, and action. But the emotional process is louder. You might think, "I can't fold again, I need to win something back." That voice belongs to tilt, not strategy. The disciplined player sees the same situation but detaches identity from the hand. They ask, what does this board do to my range? What does it do to theirs? Calmness here is not passive, it's analytical space. When the turn arrives, emotion often intensifies. This is the moment when the hand's identity begins to crystallize, where you either double down on a flawed read or realign to reason. Many beginners tilt on the turn because they interpret pressure as personal. When the opponent bets again, it feels like defiance, as if they're doing something to you. But in truth, the turn bet isn't personal, it's structural. It's part of the rhythm of poker, pressure applied where uncertainty lives. Let's play one full example to see how this unfolds. You're holding ace-jack of hearts on the button. The cutoff opens for a raise, and you call. The blinds fold. The flop comes jack 8-4 rainbow. You have top pair, top kicker. The cutoff continuation bets half the pot. You call. The turn is a queen. The cutoff bets again, this time larger. Emotion whispers, "That's not fair. I had the best hand. I deserve this pot." But reasoning steps in. The queen completes new top pairs and strong draws. Your hand's relative strength has decreased. You take a breath and call again, trusting the logic. The river comes a 10, 4 is a straight. The opponent fires one more time. This is where most tilt happens, not after losing, but before folding. That inner tension between hope and fear. You remember the earlier hands you lost. You want this one to balance the scales. That desire is the spark of tilt. But the composed player steps back. They replay the hand in sequence. Open, call, board texture, betting pattern. They see the story clearly. Too many hands beat them now. They fold. The chips slide away, but their focus stays. No emotional scar, no spike of adrenaline, no spiral. That's what it looks like when awareness wins over impulse. And what's beautiful is that the same moment replayed with a tilted mindset tells a very different story. In that version, the player calls the river out of frustration. They see the same cards but interpret them through the lens of loss. They feel the pot slipping away and grab at it. The opponent shows the straight, and now the reaction sharpens. Anger, self-blame, disbelief. The mistake wasn't calling, it was reacting. One emotional decision creates 10 logical errors in the next hour. The next hand arrives too soon. They're still thinking about the fold they should have made. They raise a weak hand to get it back. And just like that, tilt has turned a single hand into a mental landslide. The key to avoiding this cascade is what professionals call the emotional stop-loss. Just as you'd set a limit for your bankroll, you can set a limit for your mood. One lost pot, no matter how unfair, does not earn the right to rewrite your process. The next hand is a clean slate only if you let it be. By the time the river hits, composure is less about logic and more about recovery. The mind can only calculate so long before emotion demands attention. So when the hand ends, win or lose, take a ritualized pause. Stack your chips slowly. Breathe once, deeply. Feel the physicality of calm before the next deal. This reset transforms what could have become tilt into resilience. Think of poker as a meditation with stakes. Each street invites a test of patience. Each loss tempts you to abandon clarity. But if you practice seeing every decision as a self-contained moment, you start to decouple identity from outcome. The hand doesn't define you. Your response does. The best players aren't those who never get emotional, they're the ones who recover fastest. They treat every misfortune as data, every frustration as feedback. And with that perspective, even losing hands become valuable. When you can analyze a loss without reliving it, you become dangerous, not because you're fearless, but because you're unshaken. Over time, these habits stack like chips of awareness. You start to recognize early signals, the tightening chest, the quickened breath, the impulse to defend pride. Those are the warning signs of tilt. When you notice them, you can step back into logic before they take root. Poker, street by street, will always press your emotional edges. The flop brings uncertainty, the turn brings doubt, the river brings judgment. But composure allows you to move through each phase without residue. You start each hand empty, neutral, and ready. In the end, the sequence of a hand is just a mirror. Preflop for patience, flop for perception, turn for discipline, river for acceptance. Tilt tries to distort that mirror, to make you see something unfair instead of something human. But when you look clearly, When you breathe through every beat, the reflection sharpens. You begin to see not the chaos of poker, but the calm within it. That's how a hand truly unfolds, not in chips and cards, but in awareness expanding moment by moment. Discipline begins long before the flop. Most players believe emotional control starts after a loss, but the truth is, it begins with your very first decision, the hands you choose to play. Tilt often disguises itself as looseness. You lose a pot, and the next thing you know, you're raising with hands you'd normally fold. You tell yourself it's confidence or mixing it up, but really it's frustration searching for control. That's why having a clear starting hand plan is essential, not just for mathematical reasons, but emotional ones. A structured pre-flop approach acts like a guardrail. It prevents you from wandering into chaos when your feelings get loud. When your brain is busy trying to justify every new decision, your emotions have room to steer. But when you know what belongs in your range, the noise fades, and you can focus on execution, not impulse. Start with position. It's the quiet architecture of poker. The earlier you act, the tighter your range should be. The later you act, the more freedom you earn. This balance isn't about memorizing charts, it's about respecting information. Emotional players often forget that poker is a game of incomplete knowledge, and the only real advantage you have is when others act before you. When you're tilted, you throw that advantage away. You call or raise out of position just to make something happen, turning logic into noise. A simple exercise can help. Before you sit down, visualize your positional ranges like concentric circles, tight in early position, wide on the button. If you can feel that rhythm before the cards come, your hands will almost choose themselves. That's the first layer of control. The second layer is understanding odds, but not through cold numbers. You don't need to calculate every percentage, you just need to recognize ratio and rhythm. Poker is about frequencies, how often certain outcomes or scenarios appear. A calm player doesn't panic when a draw misses because they understand it was supposed to miss most of the time. When you think in terms of ratios, disappointment turns into data. For example, say you call a preflop raise with suited connectors like 8-9 of hearts. You flop a straight draw and a flush draw, there's 16 outs total. You miss the turn and then the river, and the pot goes the other way. A frustrated player feels betrayed by the luck. A disciplined one recognizes that even with 16 outs, they're still behind most of the time. Logic protects them from emotional surprise. That's why ratio thinking matters. It quietly removes the drama from variance. The third element of your starting hand plan is balance. Balance keeps you unpredictable, and unpredictability keeps you safe. When tilt takes over, your play becomes transparent. You bet too quickly, chase too eagerly, fold too late. But when your starting range is consistent and balanced, even your emotions lose the ability to distort your play completely. Think of your range as a story. Every time you open, call, or fold, you're telling the table what kind of player you are. The goal isn't to act robotic, it's to make your story cohesive. A balanced range says, I play with intention. That subtle consistency earns you respect, which in turn gives your bluffs credibility and your folds authority. Let's say you're under the gun in a full ring game. You open with ace-king, pocket queens, and occasionally ace-queen suited. Sometimes you throw in a suited connector like 9-10 to keep balance. When you follow this pattern consistently, even if you lose one of those hands, the table sees you as controlled. That perception shields you from emotional targeting. Opponents won't sense weakness or tilt because your decisions always fit your structure. Now contrast that with a player who tilts after a single loss. They start opening with their hands far outside their normal range. King 7 off suit, Queen 10 off, small pairs they'd normally fold. The table notices. Opponents begin to isolate them, exploit them, and apply pressure. The emotional player, already tilted, starts to interpret this as persecution. Why are they going after me, they think? The answer is simple. Predictability created opportunity. A structured starting hand plan doesn't just make you stronger, It makes you harder to read, even when you're emotional. That's real protection. There's also a psychological benefit to structure. It gives you permission to fold without guilt. Many beginners tilt not because they lost, but because they folded what later would have been a winning hand. They replay it in their mind thinking, if only I'd stayed in. But when you have a solid plan, that guilt dissolves. You know why you folded, and that reason doesn't change with hindsight. Think of folding as an act of faith, not in luck, but in discipline. Each fold honors your process. Each decision to wait reinforces control. Folding in this light becomes not a loss, but a reaffirmation of patience. Another way to use structure is through pre-session intentions. Before you begin, tell yourself, my goal tonight is not to win every hand, it's to play my structure without emotional deviation. That small mental anchor shifts your definition of success. Instead of measuring by results, you measure by integrity, and ironically, that's what leads to better results over time. Let's connect this back to tilt. Most tilt originates from reactive thinking. I can't believe he called that. I should have folded. That's so unfair. But when you've already pre-committed to your framework, there's less room for narrative. The game becomes mechanical in a good way. You operate within your structure, then step back to observe. And that observer's mindset, detached but alert, is the exact opposite of tilt. The final piece of your starting hand plan is reflection. After each session, review which hands triggered emotional response. Was it losing with a strong hand, folding a borderline one, getting bluffed? Each of those moments reveals where your process is weakest. Over time, you start to see patterns, not just in your opponents, but in yourself. For instance, you might notice you loosen up too much in late position after losing a big hand early, or you might tighten up excessively after getting bluffed. These are emotional compensations, your brain trying to protect you from discomfort. But awareness turns them into opportunities. When you know your tendencies, you can anticipate them, and that anticipation turns potential tilt into composure. Building your starting hand plan, then, isn't just about preflop logic. It's about emotional scaffolding. It's a ritual of preparation that steadies you before chaos even begins. When the cards fall and the chips move across the table, the one thing you can always control is your starting point. A consistent foundation keeps your focus intact, no matter what storms unfold later. And as you keep playing, you'll begin to notice something quiet but powerful. The less you fight variance, the more peace you feel. The more peace you feel, the better your logic flows. In poker and in life, structure is freedom. Tournament poker is its own kind of storm, not because the cards behave differently, but because the pressure never lets up. The blinds rise, the stacks shrink, and every mistake feels heavier than it should. You can't just reload or step away for a break. You're contained within the structure, and that containment tests composure like nothing else. The key to staying calm in tournaments begins with a shift in perspective. You're not there to win every pot, you're there to survive long enough for the math and your mindset to converge. Every chip you protect early has exponential value later. Yet most beginners tilt precisely because they chase the wrong objective. They confuse momentum with necessity, thinking they must build a stack right now or be left behind. That urgency fuels impatience, and impatience is the gateway to emotional play. In the early stages, the field is wide and the blinds are small. The temptation is to get involved, to see flops and accumulate chips while it's cheap. But the early phase isn't about expansion, it's about insulation. Your primary job here is to avoid damage. A tilted player sees opportunity everywhere. A composed player sees risk first. Staying calm means recognizing that every hand you don't play recklessly extends your tournament life. You can think of the early levels as the foundation for mental endurance. These hours aren't where you win the tournament. They're where you build the focus to reach the moments that matter. Play solid, play measured, and let the anxious players exhaust themselves. Tilt thrives on boredom. It whispers that you're wasting time folding. But patience here is the quiet accumulation of equity. As the tournament progresses into the middle stages, stack depth and pressure begin to collide. This is where emotional control either stabilizes or collapses. You'll lose more pots simply because the blinds have grown. Variance feels closer, mistakes cost more, and your inner critic gets louder. Tilt at this stage often shows up as self-doubt, the belief that you're playing too tight or missing your chance. Here, composure means trusting your process over the illusion of urgency. Every decision should still serve the long game. If you've built structure in your starting hand plan, this is where it pays dividends. You know your positional ranges, you understand the math, and you accept that survival is a strategy, not a stall. Let's use an example. You're deep in a mid-stage tournament with an average stack. You pick up pocket nines in the cutoff. A player in early position raises, and the big blind has already shown aggression multiple times. Normally, this might be a call or a light re-raise. But you sense that the early raiser is strong and that the big blind could squeeze again. Emotion says, take the flip. Win a big pot, get unstuck. Logic says, preserve flexibility. Let the chaos collide without you. You fold and the big blind shoves, the raiser calls with ace-queen, and an ace lands on the flop. You would have been out. Moments like that don't feel heroic, they feel quiet. But those are the folds that define composure. You didn't react to boredom or fear. You trusted the discipline you've built. And in tournaments, that restraint is often the difference between busting early and reaching the money. Now, as you near the bubble, that fragile line between survival and profit, emotions amplify. Players start tightening up, afraid to lose what they've built. Others do the opposite. They go on a tear, trying to bully those who've become cautious. The energy shifts sharply, and you can almost feel tilt hovering over the table, looking for hosts. This is where your earlier work on emotional awareness becomes your shield. Recognize that the bubble isn't about cards, it's about patience management. You will see people get frustrated, flustered, even reckless because they can't tolerate waiting. Your job is to stay neutral. Every orbit that passes without damage increases your edge. When tilt takes out impatient players, your discipline silently moves you up the payout ladder. In later stages, final tables or deep runs, the pressure transforms again. The blinds are massive, the stacks shallow, and every decision feels surgical. Tilt here doesn't look like anger, it looks like fatigue. Emotional exhaustion leads to shortcuts, quick calls, lazy folds, rushed timing. The calm player slows down deliberately. They treat every hand as if it's the first of the night. Breathing becomes strategy. Posture becomes composure. At this level, emotional control isn't passive, it's active maintenance. Professionals do this instinctively. They use micro-routines to reset their nervous systems. They sip water between hands, refocus their eyes, or replay neutral images in their mind to clear the slate. Beginners can do the same. The mind can't stay steady for hours without care. It needs micro moments of rest. Let's revisit a common emotional trap. Busting from a tournament. Everyone who plays long enough knows the ache of it. The deep breath when your final hand loses and the seat empties. That's the most dangerous moment for tilt. Not because of the loss itself, but because of what follows, the story your mind writes. I always get unlucky. I was playing so well until that. I never win these. Composure after elimination is part of composure during play. The pros who walk away calmly aren't cold, they're practiced. They've trained their brains to treat exit as feedback, not failure. The quicker you can reflect instead of relive, the faster your growth accelerates. Ask yourself, did I play my structure? Did I manage my emotions? Did I fold when logic told me to? If yes, then nothing was lost. You executed your process. The rest was variance. One mental exercise helps in tournaments that zoom out. After every major hand, win or lose, imagine the entire arc of the event. Thousands of hands, dozens of decisions, a day or two of play. Suddenly, one bad beat shrinks to its proper size. Perspective kills tilt because it reminds you that no single hand defines your story. And when you finally do reach those deep stages, when fatigue sets in and adrenaline fades, remember that emotional steadiness is your edge. At that point, everyone's playing well technically. What separates winners from the rest is who can think clearly longest. Poker tournaments are emotional mirrors of life itself. Pressure, uncertainty and impermanence, all compressed into a few hours. You'll lose hands you deserve to win. You'll watch luck tilt the scales. But if you meet each swing with composure, you gain something more durable than chips. You gain trust in yourself. The longer you play, the more you realize that every tournament is won not just by the one who gets lucky, but by the one who stayed level-headed long enough to receive that luck. And that's the paradox of poker composure. The less you chase control, the more control you actually gain. Emotional control in poker isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about learning how to feel everything, disappointment, frustration, anxiety, without letting those emotions decide for you. Poker, more than almost any other game, is a mirror. It doesn't just reveal how you think, it reveals how you cope. Everyone has a plumb on until they get rivered. Everyone feels calm until the game tests their patience. That's when the real work begins, not on the felt, but in your own awareness. Because tilt doesn't come from the cards, it comes from how we interpret what the cards mean about us. When you lose a hand, your mind doesn't just process math, it searches for narrative. I played that right. He got lucky. This always happens. It tries to make sense of randomness, but poker resists explanation. Variance isn't personal, it's the price of entry into a game built on uncertainty. When you internalize that truth, you stop fighting variance as if it's an enemy. You begin to coexist with it. That coexistence is the heart of emotional control. You don't silence emotion, you sit beside it. You notice the heat in your chest, the quickened heartbeat, the subtle tightening of your jaw. Those sensations are not mistakes, they're signals. They are your body reminding you that you care. Emotional awareness transforms those signals from traps into tools. Try this. After a tough hand, take one slow breath through your nose. As you exhale, name what you feel, not anger, but something more specific. I feel impatience, or I feel fear of losing control. Labeling emotion in real time creates a small but powerful distance between feeling and reaction. That gap is where clarity lives. Professional players practice this constantly. They aren't immune to emotion. They've just built reflexes around it. You'll see them stare blankly after a brutal beat, stack their chips slowly, and continue with you without visible change. That isn't coldness, it's training. Every deliberate motion is a reset. They've built rituals that return their nervous system to neutral before the next hand begins. Beginners, on the other hand, often move too fast. They try to escape emotion by diving straight into the next hand, hoping action will drown discomfort. But what actually happens is that emotion follows them, disguised as aggression, impatience, or carelessness. The hand that follows a loss is always the most dangerous one, not because of the cards, but because of what's still echoing in your mind. You can think of the emotional control as a skill built in layers. The first layer is recognition, seeing when emotion arises. The second is containment, letting the feeling exist without acting on it. The third is redirection, channeling that energy into awareness rather than impulse. When you lose a hand and want to play faster, that's the exact moment to slow down. When you feel the urge to prove something, that's the moment to observe instead. One of the hardest lessons in poker psychology is that ego is the enemy of focus. Ego turns learning into judgment. It whispers that you shouldn't have made that mistake, that you're better than that opponent, that variance is unfair. Ego demands control when none exists. But composure grows when you surrender the need to be right and return to the desire to understand. Imagine two players. One loses a big pot with pocket aces, slams his chips and mutters, "Unbelievable." The other takes the same beat, sits still and says nothing. 10 minutes later, who's playing better? The first player is still replaying the loss in his mind, subtly reshaping his decisions around it. The second player has moved on. That difference doesn't show up in the moment, but over a lifetime of hands it defines who succeeds. The truth is, tilt isn't one emotion, it's a chain reaction. Frustration leads to pride, pride leads to stubbornness, and stubbornness leads to mistakes. The cure isn't avoidance, it's interruption. You have to break the chain early. A single breath, a pause before betting, a brief look away from the table, small physical acts that anchor you back to the present. You can also build emotional endurance outside of poker. Meditation, journaling, exercise. These aren't cliches. They're the off-table equivalents of mental reps. They train your nervous system to recover faster from stress, because poker doesn't just require skill, it requires stamina. Every decision taxes your focus, and without emotional recovery, that focus decays. There's a story that illustrates this well. A young player once asked a veteran how to stop tilting. The older player smiled and said, "You can't stop tilt. You can only stop believing it." The young player frowned, confused. The veteran continued, "Tilt is just your mind lying to you. It tells you that something unfair just happened and you need to fix it. But if you recognize it as a story, as your brain trying to protect your pride, it loses power. You don't have to silence it. Just stop believing every word. That's the secret. You can't prevent the first spark of frustration, but you can refuse to feed it. Emotional control isn't about perfection, it's about awareness in motion. Even when you feel frustration rise, remember, emotion has a half-life. If you let it burn without acting, it fades quickly. If you fuel it with action and chasing pots, arguing with luck, it multiplies. The calm player allows emotion to pass like weather. They trust that their baseline will return if they don't interfere. Over time, you start to notice patterns in your emotional rhythm. You learn what kind of losses trigger you most. Maybe it's being bluffed. Maybe it's losing with a premium hand. That awareness becomes predictive. You can prepare for tilt before it happens. The moment you recognize the pattern, you can interrupt it with conscious routine. Deep breath, posture reset, small smile next hand. The more you practice this, the less poker feels like combat, and the more it feels like observerskibbing. You start to see how emotion flows through the table itself, how other players tighten up after losing, how their hands tremble, how their bets become inconsistent. Emotional literacy doesn't just protect you, it gives you an edge. You begin reading tilt in others as clearly as you once felt it in yourself. And here's something most players never realize. Composure is contagious. When you sit quietly, make thoughtful folds and never show irritation, the entire table shifts. The game slows down, the noise softens. Opponents begin to question themselves instead of you. Calm energy disarms chaos. Poker psychology at its highest level isn't about stoicism. It's about compassion. Compassion for yourself when you make mistakes. Compassion for opponents who act from their own tilt. This doesn't mean a softness. It means clarity. The more you understand emotion, your own and others, the more the game opens up in front of you. Because ultimately, tilt isn't the opposite of composure, it's the teacher of it. Every time you lose your cool, you get a chance to study the path back. Each recovery makes the next one faster, until calm becomes your default. The goal isn't to eliminate tilt forever. That's impossible. The goal is to recognize it so quickly that it never costs you more than a single breath. When that becomes your standard, the game changes entirely. You stop trying to feel good and start aiming to stay clear. Clarity becomes your edge. You see more, react less, and drift into that rare state every poker player chases, the flow of focus. In that space, you no longer fear losing a hand, you respect it. You understand it's the necessary contrast that gives meaning to every win. And when others spiral, when they can't accept the randomness, you sit still, steady, aware, patient. That's the quiet heart of poker mastery. You're no longer fighting emotional variance. You're learning to coexist with both, and in that coexistence lies the freedom that every player seeks. Once you've built emotional awareness and a structured foundation, you start to notice something subtler. The way composure changes your relationship with time. When you're calm, the game slows down. The cards land softly, the chips sound lighter, and every action feels deliberate. When you're tilted, everything accelerates. Your thoughts race, your pulse quickens, and poker becomes a blur. Mastery begins when you learn to slow the internal tempo of the game, not by thinking harder, but by being more present. This is where deeper insight begins. You start realizing that tilt isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's invisible. It shows up as mild frustration, rushed decisions, or mental fatigue. It's not about emotion exploding, it's about focus leaking. The best players in the world guard their focus like a finite resource. Every unnecessary thought, every ounce of irritation drains it. When you play from calm presence, you're not just avoiding mistakes, you're gaining access to higher perception. You notice patterns others miss. The rhythm of bets, the subtle pauses, the way an opponent's confidence shifts as the board develops. Tilt blinds you to these microsignals, composure sharpens them. At this stage, emotional control becomes strategic. It's not just about staying even, it's about using your awareness to predict how others are feeling. The moment you recognize tilt in your opponent, the too fast bet, the shallow breathing, the forced small talk, you gain an enormous edge. You no longer need perfect reads or lucky cards. You have rhythm, patience, and time on your side. The nuance here is learning to balance logic with empathy. You're not exploiting your opponent's pain, you're reading it with respect. You understand that tilt makes players human, and in that humanity lies their predictability. When you see someone lose a big pot, you don't rush to attack them immediately. You watch how they handle it. Do they stare at the felt too long? Do they raise too soon afterward? The truth reveals itself slowly, to those who are still enough to notice. This is the quiet power of self-awareness. It becomes outward awareness. When you know your own triggers, you see them mirrored in others. You realize that everyone at the table is fighting their own battle with variance and ego. And instead of reacting emotionally, you begin to play with a kind of detached compassion, competitive, but not hostile. Let's look at a more advanced example to illustrate how this deeper layer works. You're on the turn with King-Queen of spades. The board reads Ace-10-9 with 2 spades. You flopped an open-ended straight draw and a flush draw, a monster combination draw. You've bet both flop and turn, and now your opponent check-raises you large. Rationally, it's a strong line. Emotionally, it's a challenge. You've missed so many draws tonight. You're tempted to shove, to make something happen, but composure pauses that instinct. You breathe, replay the action, and realize your draw has equity, but your opponent's range is polarized. A calm mind sees that calling is fine, folding is fine, forcing action is not. You call, the river bricks, but the opponent checks. You check back and lose to a set. You don't collapse or replay it endlessly. You record it, accept it, and move on. In contrast, a tilted player sees that same hand as a personal defeat. They might shove the turn out of frustration, or bluff the river needlessly. Tilt narrows vision, composure expands it. Deeper insight is about that expansion, seeing beyond results into patterns, beyond emotion into cause. You start noticing not just what tilt feels like, but why it happens. Often it's not the loss itself, it's the fear of what the loss represents. For some, it's fear of failure. For others, it's fear of looking foolish. But once you see tilt as rooted in fear, you can meet it with understanding rather than resistance. Awareness also reveals another truth. Emotional balance and technical skill are inseparable. The more emotional you become, the less access you have to your strategic memory. When you're tilted, you literally think less clearly. It's not weakness, it's biology. The prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, shuts down when your stress response activates. Calmness, then, is not just psychological, it's physiological strategy. Every deep breath, every moment of stillness reactivates your decision-making center. This is why composure feels powerful. It's not mystical, it's neurological alignment. Your body and mind are working together instead of competing for control. At higher levels of play, this composure evolves into adaptability. The best players don't just follow the theory, they sense when to deviate from it. They might make an unorthodox fold against a specific opponent or choose a small bluff in a strange spot. But those deviations aren't guesses. They're informed intuitions, the product of deep, quiet focus. Rigid players, even if technically skilled, crumble under emotional pressure because they rely solely on logic. Emotional players crumble because they rely solely on feeling. Balanced players thrive because they use both. Logic guides the structure. Instinct fills in the spaces between. When you're calm, these two forces cooperate beautifully. There's a rhythm to this harmony. Logic asks, what's the most likely outcome? Instinct asks, what feels out of place? The marriage of those questions defines advanced play. You can't access that state if you're tilted. Tilt drowns instinct in noise and logic in panic. Composure clears the static. In time, you start noticing that the same emotional control that keeps you steady after a bad beat also opens the door to creative play. You're no longer bound by fear of loss. You can make thin value bets or disciplined folds without second guessing. Freedom emerges from emotional neutrality. Some players describe this as flow, a state where thought and action merge. In flow, there's no anxiety, no self-consciousness, no tilt. You're fully present, moving seamlessly between analysis and instinct. Achieving that state requires more than knowledge. It requires emotional maturity. You can't think your way into flow, you have to feel your way into stillness first. That's what the deeper levels of composure really offer. Not the absence of emotion, but the alignment of it. Every feeling becomes information. Every hand becomes meditation. Every loss becomes a lesson in patience. Over years of play, you begin to see that composure is the real edge in poker. Strategy evolves, solvers change, metas shift, but emotional clarity endures. The player who can think clearly through disappointment will always outlast the one who can't. Tilt is temporary. Awareness is cumulative. Each calm response compounds into deeper confidence. And as you carry that confidence from session to session, it stops being just about poker. It becomes a quiet way of living, one where control doesn't mean domination, but balance. Because the longer you play, the clearer it becomes. The greatest victories in poker don't happen at the table. They happen inside your own mind, the moment you realize you no longer need to win to feel steady. That's when composure becomes mastery. Let's use a little example. It's late in the evening at a small card room, the kind with soft light and slow conversation. The table has settled into rhythm. You've been playing for hours, winning small pots, folding the rest. Nothing spectacular, nothing disastrous, then it happens. One of those hands that leaves an imprint. You're dealt pocket jacks on the button. You raise. The big blind, a talkative player with a loose streak, calls. The flop comes queen high, rainbow. He checks. You continuation bet, he calls. The turn brings a low card. You bet again, smaller this time. And he calls once more. The river pairs the board with another queen. He checks again. You check back, hoping for a cheap showdown. He turns over ace-queen. It's not the loss that stings. It's the confirmation that your caution didn't save you. You feel a flicker of heat in your chest. That small spark of injustice. You stack your remaining chips slowly, but inside your thoughts begin to spiral. He called with that preflop. He got rewarded for that. The dealer is already shuffling. The next hand begins before you've taken a full breath. You look down at 9-10 suited. Beautiful hand. Playable. Dangerous. You want to play it. Not because it's right, but because you want to do something. The mind whispers, get it back. You raise a little larger this time, maybe to make a point. The big blind calls again, the same opponent. The flop comes king 8-4, 2 of your suit. He checks, and you bet almost automatically, faster than usual. That's how tilt starts. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with speed. He calls again, the turn bricks. You bet bigger, pushing. He calls again. The river comes a third of your suit, a beautiful glimmering card that sends a rush through you. You hit your flush, you exhale, pianily. You swing, you shove. He snap calls. Full house, the chips are gone. Your pulse is high. The noise in the room feels sharper, the laughter at the next table louder. It's as if the whole world has turned against you. You feel it building, that instinct to reassert control. You want to prove to yourself that you can still win. But this time you stop. You place your hands on the felt flat and still. You don't look at the next deal, you just breathe. One full, deliberate breath. That's the moment everything changes. Instead of reaching for the next hand, you reach for your awareness. You remind yourself, I made the right decisions. The cards just didn't follow. You replay the last two hands not as punishment, but as study. You see the logic, the odds, the variance, and slowly that fire in your chest cools into something steadier. Acceptance. You fold the next few hands, the table keeps playing. The noise fades back into rhythm. The dealer slides chips across to other players, and for the first time all night, you're not chasing anything. You're just there, present, watching. Minutes pass and a new hand comes. Pocket eights, you raise, get one caller. The flop comes 7 high. You bet they fold. A small pot, insignificant to anyone else. But to you it feels different. You didn't win because you forced it. You won because you waited. That's how composure feels. Quiet. Almost invisible. There's no rush, no triumph, just balance returning to its place. You sit back and realize something subtle but profound. Nothing changed except your awareness. The same cards, the same opponent, the same table. What changed was how much of yourself you allowed to move with each swing. Poker didn't beat you. Impatience tried to. But patience, that soft, unremarkable act of doing nothing, saved you. As the night continues, you find yourself less reactive. A missed draw doesn't sting. A bluff that fails doesn't echo. Each hand begins and ends cleanly, like waves rolling across sand. You lose some, win some, and none of it feels urgent anymore. Later, as you rack your chips, you think back to that first queen, the one that tilted you, and you almost smile, because you see it now for what it was. Not a loss, but a lesson. A small test of balance that taught you how to stop chasing equilibrium and start living inside it. Poker didn't change, you did. And that's the quiet victory most players never notice. Poker at its core is a series of moments, each one self-contained yet somehow connected. Every decision echoes forward, shaping the ones that follow. To master composure, you have to experience it through repetition. Hand after hand, moment after moment, until stillness becomes instinct. Let's walk through a few hands together. Think of these not as lessons to memorize, but as windows into how calm awareness can change everything. Each hand is a different situation, a different temptation to tilt. But each ends with the same truth. Clarity is always an option. Hand 1, the classic bad beat. You're holding pocket kings in middle position. You raise, get one caller from the small blind. The flop comes king 9-4 rainbow, a dream. You make tops a set, you bet 4 value and your opponent calls. The turn brings a jack, you bet again a little larger this time. Your opponent hesitates, then calls once more. The river is a 10, you don't love it, but you're still far ahead most of the time. You bet half the pot. Your opponent instantly shoves. You freeze. Every logical dulled cell in your brain screams that there's only one hand that beats you, queen ace. But emotion rushes in. He can't have it again, you think. Not this time, and you call. He flips it over the straight. For a split second, your pulse spikes. The noise of the chips clattering into his stack sounds sharper than it should. But then something inside you slows down. You replay the hand logically. Your line was correct, your reasoning sound. The loss wasn't your fault. It was the variance. doing what variance does. Instead of letting that emotional energy roll into the next hand, you take one long breath, stack your remaining chips with care, and whisper inwardly, "Good fold next time." The feeling passes. The table moves on, so do you. Tilt avoided, not because the pain didn't appear, but because you refused to let it spread. Hand 2. The bluff gone wrong. You're on the button with ace-5 of spades. The cutoff opens and you 3-bet light. A standard pressure move. The blinds fold, the cutoff calls. The flop comes queen 8-2, 1 spade, or you continuation bet representing strength. He calls. The turn is a 10 of spades. You've picked up a flush draw. Equity is to continue. You barrel again. He calls once more. The river pairs the queen. You miss your flush. He checks. Here's the decision point. Do you bluff the missed draw? The story fits. You've represented a strong hand from start to finish. Logic supports the shove. But your body feels tense, not from analysis, but from desperation. You want to win the pot to restore confidence. That's the moment awareness saves you. You recognize that your reasoning isn't clean. It's emotional camouflage, logic being used to justify impulse. You check back. He shows a weak ace and takes the small pot. You lose less than you could have. You didn't win the chips, but you preserved the state of mind that earns them long term. Tilt avoided. Hand 3. The long grind. You've been card dead for an hour. Every playable hand misses the flop. Every c-bet gets raised. Your stack has slowly eroded. It's the kind of session that tests patience. Death by 1,000 cuts. You finally pick up pocket tens in early position. You raise, get 2 callers. The flop comes queen 7-3 with 2 hearts. You continuation bet, get 1 call and 1 fold. The turn brings an ace. Your opponent bets into you this time, half the pot. It's a frustrating spot. You feel your grip on discipline slipping. You think, he's probably just bluffing. I've been folding too much. You call, not from logic, but pride. The river brings another heart, completing the flush draw. He bets again. You sigh, fold, and he shows you a bluff. King, jack off suit. No hearts. That sting, the he got me again feeling, is one of poker's oldest triggers, but you stop yourself from internalizing it. You don't spiral. You note it as information. He's capable of aggression. You'll adjust later. You let go of the need to be right now. That's composure in its purest form, the letting truth reveal itself over time. The session continues quietly, and 2 hours later, the same player bluffs into your strong hand. You win a large pot, not because of luck, but because your patience let the pattern complete. Tilt didn't just fail to derail you, it helped you collect data. Hand 4, the emotional echo. You just lost a big pot with pocket aces. Nothing you could have done. Your opponent hit a set on the river. You're still replaying it in your head when the next hand is dealt. You look down at King 10 suited. The same opponent raises again. Emotion urges you forward. He's getting too confident, it whispers. Take this one back. You call. The flop comes 10 high and suddenly you're justified. Top pair. You check raise for protection. He calls. The turn is harmless. You bet again. He calls again. The river brings another overcard. An ace. You check. He bets big. Logic says fold, but emotion says no, not again. You call. He turns over ace-king. The loss hurts, but the recognition arrives almost instantly. This wasn't a bad beat. This was emotional residue from the hand before. The prior loss was still playing your cards for you. You lean back and smile softly, half in embarrassment, half in clarity. The table sees nothing unusual, but inside something clicks. You finally understand the old saying, don't let one hand play the next. From that moment on, every hand becomes its own small world. Hand 5, the win that tests you. Tilt doesn't always follow loss. Sometimes it hides inside victory. You win a big pot, maybe a hero call, maybe a risky bluff, and adrenaline spikes. You feel sharp, unstoppable. That's the trap. The overconfidence that follows a win can be just as dangerous as frustration after a loss. You start widening your range, you float flops you shouldn't, you talk more, bet you would do or bet quicker, feel in rhythm. But if you watch closely, that rhythm isn't calmed, it's SID, emotion disguised as momentum. The best players recognize that high as early as they recognize tilt. They reset after big wins the same way they reset after bad beats. Because emotional imbalance in either direction is still imbalance. In one session you catch yourself doing this. You have just made a brilliant river call and the rush is still pulsing in your chest. You almost raise the next hand without looking down. Then you stop, you take a breath. You remind yourself, this next hand deserves the same patience as the first. That's how composure matures. It stops being reactive and starts being proactive. You no longer wait for chaos to calm down. You prevent it from forming at all. Hand 6. The session that tests your identity. It's late. You're down a few buy-ins. The game is winding down. A few players have left. Others are stacking big towers of chips. You've played well, but nothing's landed. A familiar thought rises. Maybe I'm just unlucky. It's a quiet, dangerous sentence. Because tilt doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like self-pity. It sounds rational, almost gentle, but beneath it lies the same old trap, surrendering control of mindset to emotion. You pause, stare at the felt, and think, what am I here to learn tonight? Not what can I win, not what should I have done, but what's the lesson this moment is offering? That one question changes everything. It reframes the entire session from outcome to awareness. The next hand, you play calm, clear, detached. You fold marginal spots without frustration. You take good lines, even when they don't pay off. And by the end of the night, something unexpected happens. Peace replaces pressure. You didn't win money, but you earned something better. Self-trust. Over time, these hands add up, not in chips, but in insight. You begin to see that tilt isn't a single event, it's a pattern of reaction. Every moment you stay calm interrupts that pattern. Each interruption compounds like interest on clarity. Poker teaches that the most valuable skill isn't knowing what to do when you're ahead, it's knowing who you are when you're behind. Because in truth, composure isn't about controlling cards or even opponents. It's about refusing to let a single emotion, pride, anger, fear, decide what kind of player you'll be. The cards will always fall where they may. The river will always surprise you sometimes. But awareness, once built, doesn't fade. You can lose 10 hands in a row and still remain whole. You can walk away from a losing night and still feel aligned. That's the quiet evolution of the composed player. The one who no longer fights the waves, but learns to float. And somewhere in that stillness, you start to understand the deeper game being played, not between you and your opponents, but between you and your own reaction to chaos. That's the game every true poker player spends a lifetime learning to win. Poker is a dance between logic and instinct. Both are necessary, both are fallible, and when they work together, they create something close to flow. But when tilt creeps in, those two forces start to fight each other. Logic shouts through reason, instinct whispers through emotion. The tilted player can't tell them apart. The composed player learns how to listen to both. Logic is the structure, the mathematics of range, position, pot odds, and probability. It's the voice that tells you what should happen most of the time. Instinct is subtler, it's a pattern recognition, intuition, the part of you that senses when something's off before the data confirms it. Logic explains, instinct feels. When you lose a hand, those two parts go to war. Logic says, it was the right play. Instinct says, I knew he had it. Emotion turns that conflict into self-doubt. The key is not choosing one over the other, but knowing when each is speaking truth. You can think of logic as your foundation and instinct as your guide. Logic keeps you safe when the situation is unfamiliar. Instinct sharpens your edge when the situation feels alive, but both require composure to function. When you're tilted, logic shuts down, and instinct becomes contaminated by emotion. What you mistake for intuition, "I can feel he's bluffing," is often just hope in disguise. A calm mind is the only state where genuine intuition can appear. True instinct isn't guessing. It's the subconscious recognizing a pattern faster than the conscious mind can describe it. That's why experienced players sometimes say, "I just knew." They don't mean magic, they mean mastery. Years of observation compressed into a quiet signal. Let's look at an example. You're in the big blind with King 9 off suit. The cutoff raises, the button calls, and you come along. The flop comes 9-7-2 rainbow. You check, the razor bets small, the button calls. You pause. Something about the button's call feels wrong, too casual, too quick. Instinct whispers, he doesn't like his hand. Logic agrees that your top pair is often good here, but not invincible. You call, the turn is an ace. The razor checks this time. The button bets. The line doesn't make sense. If he had an ace, he'd raise earlier. If he had a 9, he'd check behind. You check call again calmly. The river brings a blank. You check, he bets too large. Over half the pot. Logic runs the math and finds the call marginal. Instinct feels the tension in the air and says, he's trying to push you off it. You breathe, stay grounded, and call. He shows Queen Jack, a pure bluff. That's how logic and instinct work together when you're calm. You don't overthink, you don't overreact. You let information arrive in both forms, numbers and feeling. Now imagine the same hand while tilted. You've just lost a big pot. Your mind is racing. You interpret the same bet from the button, not as information, but as insult. You call too quickly or fold too soon, not because of logic or intuition, but because of exhaustion. That's what tilt does. It hijacks instinct and impersonates it. The balance between logic and intuition is delicate, but it grows stronger every time you stay still under pressure. You start to feel the rhythm of your own mind. You notice when your thoughts speed up or when your emotions start colouring perception. The very act of noticing that change is composure itself. Over time, this harmony becomes second nature. You begin trusting yourself again, not the impulsive part, but the patient one. You realise logic is the floor you stand on, and instinct is the wind that moves you forward. Tilt tries to collapse both. Calmness keeps them aligned. And when that alignment happens, poker feels effortless. Decisions flow. Timing feels natural. You no longer ask, what should I do? You just know. Not because you've stopped thinking, but because thought and feeling have finally learned to speak the same language. Composure in a single session is difficult. Composure over months and years is mastery. The game will test you endlessly in new forms every time. You'll go through stretches where nothing works, where every bluff gets called, every river goes the wrong way, every good decision seems punished. Those stretches are where long-term discipline is born. Most players chase control, the disciplined ones chase consistency. The difference is subtle but enormous. Control is emotional. I need this hand to go right. Consistency is logical. I'll keep doing what's right regardless of outcome. The longer you play, the more you realise that the secret to longevity isn't luck or genius. It's endurance of mind. Poker rewards the player who can remain stable through fluctuation. You can't stop variance, but you can outlast it. That means protecting your emotional capital as carefully as your financial one. Every time you allow tilt to take over, it's not just chips you lose, it's clarity. Clarity is what lets you see opportunity, avoid traps, and recover from mistakes. Long-term players build habits that preserve that clarity. They study regularly, review hands, and track patterns, not obsessively, but curiously. They don't look for validation in short-term results. They look for alignment between thought and action. Over time, that alignment becomes their real win rate. Imagine a player who treats every losing week as feedback, not failure. They notice that their aggression dipped after a bad beat, or that they defended blinds too loosely during fatigue. Instead of blaming luck, they treat emotion as data. That mindset compounds, because self-awareness grows faster than variance can erode it. Long-term discipline also means knowing when not to play. Tilt isn't always immediate. Sometimes it lingers quietly after a session, waiting for the next one. Professionals schedule rest as deliberately as they schedule study. They understand that discipline isn't only about showing up, it's about showing up sharp. If your mind is cluttered, your edge vanishes. There's a paradox at the center of poker discipline. The more you detach from results, the better your results become. Detachment doesn't mean apathy. It means you've stopped measuring yourself by the last session's outcome and started measuring by the quality of your process. You stop asking, did I win? And start asking, did I play with awareness? With time, this becomes an identity. You're no longer just a player who tries to stay calm. You're a calm player. Composure stops being effort and becomes character. It's like building muscle. Each repetition of a restraint strengthens it until discipline becomes your natural response. There's a kind of quiet confidence that comes with this level of steadiness. It's not arrogance, it's trust in your process, your patience, and your capacity to recover. When a bad run hits, you don't crumble, you adjust. When a bluff fails, you don't spiral. You log the moment, breathe, and return to baseline. Yeah, this is what professionals mean when they talk about mental game. It's not positivity or motivational slogans. It's the day in, day out act of protecting your inner equilibrium. It's treating the mind like a bank account, deposits of discipline, withdrawals of emotion, balance maintained through awareness. You start to realize that composure is cumulative. Each time you resist tilt, you add a layer to your foundation. Each time you review a hand without self-judgment, you reinforce it. Each time you walk away from the table still calm, you strengthen the habit of peace. In the long run, that becomes your greatest edge. Not your strategy, not your luck, your endurance. Because poker, more than any other game, rewards those who stay. Tilt burns fast. Patience burns forever.
And when you've built that kind of resilience, when you can sit through losses and still play your best, you've already won something no one can take from you.
That's the quiet discipline that turns a game of chance into a lifetime of clarity. The cards are still, the chips are stacked, the session is over. Somewhere between the first hand and the last, you learned something subtle, not about strategy or luck, but about yourself. You came here to learn poker, but what you've really learned is awareness. Every hand you played, every emotion you felt, every moment you paused before reacting, they all pointed toward the same quiet truth. The game was never about winning every pot. It was about learning how to stay whole when the pot slipped away. When you sit down to play, you think the goal is to make money. And it is, in part. But under that surface lies a deeper reward. The growth of composure, the slow strengthening of patience, the steady unraveling of ego. Tilt isn't just a poker problem. It's a mirror reflecting how you deal with loss, unpredictability, and the feeling of being out of control. To master poker, you don't just learn the math, you learn yourself. The next time you lose a big hand, notice what happens in those few seconds after the dealer pushes the chips away. Your instinct might be to react, to justify, to recover, to correct. But that's the very moment where mastery begins. The moment when you can see the emotional wave rise and simply let it pass. The players who last, who build careers, not streaks, are the ones who stop letting every hand dictate their mood. They learn that each decision exists in isolation, that losing isn't failure and winning isn't validation. It's all part of the same unfolding pattern, the game teaching you to sit still while the world tilts around you. There's a saying among seasoned players, poker doesn't build character, it reveals it. But if you pay attention, it does something even better. It refines character. Every moment of composure deepens your understanding of yourself. Every time you resist the urge to react, you strengthen a part of your mind that extends far beyond the table. Because poker is never just poker. The lessons you practice here, patience, restraint, perspective, follow you everywhere else. You'll feel it in conversations that used to frustrate you, in traffic that no longer tests you, in arguments that lose their urgency. The same calm that carries you through a losing hand will carry you through a rough day. In a way, poker is a meditation on impermanence. The chips come and go, hands rise and fall, you win, you lose, and you start again. Each deal is a reminder that nothing is fixed. Not your luck, not your emotions, not even your sense of self in that moment. The beauty of the game lies in that constant change. When you learn to stop clinging to outcomes, you start seeing patterns instead of chaos. You realize that variance isn't punishment, it's rhythm. It's what makes the game alive, what keeps humility close to victory. Without loss, there would be no discipline. Without tilt, there would be no composure. And that's the real paradox. The very thing that frustrates you, the bad beat, the unfair river, the losing session, is the same thing teaching you balance. Every emotional challenge is an invitation to refine your awareness, to breathe, to realign, to remember that you are not your results. You can fold a hand and still be growing. You can lose a pot and still be improving. You can walk away down in chips and still leave stronger. That's what makes poker more than a game. It's a practice. Each session is a lesson in impermanence, and each act of restraint is a quiet victory over the part of you that wants control. The discipline of avoiding tilt early isn't just about emotional stability. It's about trust, trusting the long-term process, trusting your own reasoning, trusting that calm decisions will always outlast chaotic ones. When you finally internalize that, something shifts. You stop playing to soothe emotion and start playing to express clarity. And the strange thing is, the more you release attachment to results, the more the results begin to follow. Not because the universe rewards calm, but because clear thinking naturally creates better choices. Calmness is efficiency disguised as patience. You'll still lose sometimes, everyone does, but the loss won't shake you. You'll still feel emotion, but it won't control you. You'll still care, but you won't cling. And in that stillness, the game will open up in ways you couldn't see before. In the end, poker doesn't reward the one who burns the brightest. It rewards the one who burns the longest. The one who can fold without regret, lose without anger, and win without arrogance. When you reach that level of calm, that quiet steadiness that doesn't need to prove anything, poker stops being a battle and becomes a mirror. Every hand simply reflects back your state of mind. And if that reflection shows peace, patience, and presence, you've already won. The chips, the cards, the noise, they'll fade. But what remains is the discipline you built in the silence that followed every loss. The ability to breathe instead of break. To stay composed, not perfect. Because perfection was never the goal. Composure was. And once you learn that, once you stop tilting, not because you forced yourself to stay calm, but because calm has become who you are, the game, and maybe even life itself, feels lighter. So the next time you sit down, let the cards fall however they may. Let the hands come and go. And remember, the real victory isn't in the pot you win. It's in the moment you realize you no longer need it to feel whole.